Welcome. This is Todd from Figure Fiend, and this is the first, I guess, more detailed tutorial video that is going to be covering sculpting. I'm going to start with a really basic head and then transform it into a werewolf head that's going to be used for an 8-inch scale figure similar to Mego, and I'll take you guys through the process of how I start this from start to finish. What you see right here is my rough sketch. I always start with the rough sketch, whatever I'm going to be working on. This shows the Werewolf Halloween mask style figure that I want to do, a basic semblance of what I think the outfit's going to be, which is going to be very torn, very ragged. I'm going to piece it out of existing pieces, maybe even dye some of them. So to jump right into it, one of the first things I do is I do have a set of heads, right? Like a standard head, a heroic head that I've sculpted. Any of these heads, though, will work fine, but what you can do is you can just look for a head that already exists online and use that as a base. And that could be just male, female, young, old. You'll probably want to standardize it, because what you're going to do is you're going to destroy this base head that you start with to get the sculpture that you want. And right now what I'm doing is I'm looking at the reference for the mask that I'm sculpting, and I'm making changes to the nose and the overall structure to get something a little bit closer, and adjusting the mouth so that at least it has the snarling face that you see in the same regard. But I'm going to utterly destroy the entire mouth, as you can see here, just to get the right shape, and then knowing that I'm going to fit in extra pieces later, such as the teeth, the eyes, that sort of thing. So I'm using Nomad for this stuff. I do have experience sculpting in ZBrush. I find Nomad to be much faster, much cleaner. It's not as detail oriented, but most of what I'm using in all of this video is I'm using the brush, which is either adding or subtracting material. I'm using the move tool, which is pushing things around. As you can see here, I'm pushing the lips around just to get the mouth into a better state, because I basically moved sections up and down. I cut a hole in where I thought the mouth would be. Now I'm adding lip material using the basic brush, and then I'm just changing the pressure and the size. But almost all the sculpting I'm doing in this video is using those three brushes, which are just your standard brush, your move brush, and then sometimes the flatten brush here and there. And once I've gotten the basic semblance down of like positioning the nose how I wanted, positioning the mouth how I want, now I can start detailing in. And I do leave symmetry set for this stage. I'm basically bulking in as much of the raw shape as possible and keeping it really rough, keeping it really loose. It's not meant to be detailed at any point, and meant to be just the most general semblance of where I want the textures to occur and the buildup to occur. For the fur, I'm trying to bulk it up in this way in this first pass, knowing that I'm going to go in and do a medium level detail pass and then a fine detail pass over top of it. And one thing you'll see me doing is I move the head around the entire time. Even though my reference that you can see on the right is a front view, I want to look at the sculpture from all sides as I'm doing it. So I'm constantly moving it around, and another thing that I do is I constantly zoom it really far away when I'm doing this, because in the end it's going to be a very small piece. So it's kind of good to see it in context, and you want to exaggerate the detail, because when you're sculpting something like this digitally, you're looking at it full screen, you're looking at it large, but when it prints it's really small. So you've got to go more aggressive with the detail. And even with this fur pass that I'm doing right now, which is sort of radial around the head, I'm going as big and as bold as possible with really large strokes just to get the mass form in. And putting attention into like adding depth under the eyes, looking at the reference, and then adding some of the characteristic like folds around the mouth, as you can see in the reference photo. Like, it really helps to be looking at that, because then I can determine how close I am to that. And knowing that I'm going to make more personnel adjustments later that are going to be tied more to asymmetry than you see here. So at this point, I've got a basic general fur setup for the front of the face. and I'm doing details and pushing and pulling areas around the mouth and around where those folds sort of like fan out. And then switching over to the move tool right now to start pushing and pulling to get a better silhouette that closely matches the mask on the other side, because before it was way too humanoid, much too standard. So this is me using that tool, turning symmetry off, because you want the asymmetry that shows up in the sculpt to be in your sculpt in this regard. So I had this turned off in many cases to push and pull areas around, just to make it look more natural and make it look more hand done. So right now I'm building up the cheek areas and adding details around the eyes. And then, as you can see, I'm trying to look at it from all sides as I'm doing it. And even right here, I'm focusing efforts on like adding more mass around the lips and more depth around the lips, because once I cut that hole into the lips before, it sort of destroyed the structures that were there previously. So the next phase is moving into adding a little bit more detail. So this is when I look at doing a medium level pass, where you can see the tool marks on the sculpt itself of the latex mask, which are awesome. So I'm trying to get some of that detail in there where I put in all the broad forms, all the big sweeping areas. So now I'm trying to go in with more of a fine medium level and get some details and personality in there. As you can see, I'm focusing on the nose right now, trying to get these tiny marks into the nose. And I'm adding and subtracting, going back and forth. And what you want to do when sculpting something like this is just to go back and forth and take away material, add material, use the move tool to push and pull things around, and basically just make changes. And if you change your mind on something, just wipe it out and redo it. You'll see me redoing that to the cheek areas very soon, where I've built up this sort of like low and medium level detail around the cheek areas. And then I found that it doesn't match the concept or the photograph on the right as closely as I'd hoped. So this is adding that medium level that sort of radiates around the head itself, and I'm trying to get some unevenness to it. So as you can see, the symmetry is turned off so that I can add that sort of like level of personality that you get where it's not completely symmetrical in any way. And this is adding additional like details around the eyes as I go and try to get that level built up. Now once I've got that down, I'm doing more of the fine-tuning medium stuff where I'm adding transitional fur that sort of connects these areas that do not have any fur buildup. Here right now I'm trying to build up under the chin to add more mass, and it's still coming out really thin. And even trying out different brushes and brush widths. There are fur alphas that you can use, but for this I just wanted to use the basic brush. I didn't want to use fur alphas. I've used them before in the past, but a lot of the stuff I've made with them tends to look very similar, where if you use the standard brushes, you create unique shapes yourself. So it's very helpful in that way. So right now is going back and trying to add more depth and mass to the chin and build up, because it needs to be a little bit thicker under there to be more substantial. And it was looking a little too atrophied, I guess, and too humanoid in that respect. So you can see here I pull back really far to look at things. And then I even make some scale adjustments to try to like narrow the head in this regard and sink in a little bit of the cheeks. And then once I zoom back in, I go into reworking some of the areas and adding more detail around the periphery of the eyes. So right here is these fine lines that show up in the sculpture. I'm trying to add a bunch of those to connect the chin. And that therefore it just looks more natural. And then also making adjustments to the head using the move tool when I zoom in and out and then look at it from different sides. So this is the fine tuning I was talking about, where it adds these fine lines that tie in these bigger, bulkier forms. And then moving in and adding a little bit more of that in the areas around the eyes and the cheeks themselves. So once I've gotten that to a point where I'm happy with, I start to carry those lines, those medium level lines and detail level lines throughout the head, and try to pull the fur through it in a sense where it feels more cohesive and less like when you kind of start sculpting some of this stuff, it tends to be pretty clumpy and pretty lumpy, but adding these detail lines could help make things more cohesive and tie the forms together. So that's what I'm doing right now. And even with the edges of this beard, I'm going in with a tool and I'm cutting sections out of the edge to remove some of the softness that you'd have from just going over it very, very broadly. And once I've got that down, I then move on to adding additional lines around the brow and eye areas. And so to keep that moving across. This is where I've gotten to more of a fine detail level around the cheeks and eyes themselves and try to get more definition. I've narrowed them in what I did just there. In the video, it is sped up like 4 times at this point. It was a 2-hour sculpt, and I basically filmed the first hour of it, just screen recording on my iPad, and sped it up so I could talk over that, because obviously I'm not going to do a full hour and talk over that. Would be too much. So this is me pulling back again to take a look at how things are looking, which I do constantly. I always go back and forth just to keep an eye on how things are looking from a distance. So this is me smoothing out over the areas that I was just doing because I was not happy with that area. And like, it's the kind of thing where I will destroy an area that I've sculpted and just try to start again by using smooth and using the flatten brushes to try to get a new foundation. And now I'm trying to change the directionality of the lines that I use to indicate the fur to make them more nuanced and follow a little bit more closely to the reference itself, the photograph. So I had my shapes going too radially around the head, and they sort of tapered down from the nose and across, rather than exactly following like the periphery of the head. And then this is a very big bulk pass of just bulking out some of the remaining fur elements that are meant to occur on the sides and back, and me going very broad with a very big thick brush to try to get those general shapes up. And I always sculpt from bottom to top when it comes to doing fur. That way I can layer the mid and upper portions on top of the lower portions. It gives it more depth and the way that it looks like it lays. And I move around the whole time while I'm doing it. And now I'm coming in with a finer brush and building up over top of those forms, which are pretty lumpy in that regard. Because it's just the way the pressure of the brush is working when I'm doing that, and just trying to get a much more like detailed look, and then zooming back really far to see how it looks at size, because in the end it's going to be like an inch tall. And then this is going in and looking at some of the areas that I'm not happy with, and one of those things is the symmetry. So I'm going to knock the symmetry off and start trying to fix some of these areas back here after I've done some more like additional detailing lines back here. And this is to connect those general shapes together. So after that's done, these tiny strands of hair that basically intersect the medium areas that I've hit. I've turned off symmetry now too, which is just, it tends to make it look much more natural than if you leave symmetry on when using this. And then looking at this mass in the back of the head, and then using the move tool right now to adjust that in ways that I'm happy with the end result, because you end up with weird intersections in a lot of cases when symmetry is turned on. So by disabling it and then using the move tool, I am basically pushing it, pulling it into a place and then going back to the brush and sculpting some areas that make it look a little bit more natural. So that's it for where I ended in that point, which is shown on the left. And then I went back and I did another maybe like 30 to 40 minutes with the move tool, which is shown here, and then basically scaled it out to get closer to what the mask was, and then to add more personality, like to shift the lips down on an angle, to pull sections of the beard, to widen the head. And then this is my first test at adding teeth. So basically I model the teeth out separately and in another program, and then I fit the teeth, and then I do create spheres and I put them over the eye areas. And then I already had hands from Curse of the Werewolf. And this is my first printed test at looking at the pieces. And then I decided that I was happy with the way they looked, but I thought that the werewolf head was going to be too small once clothes were put on, and it was also too narrow. So then I went back to the sculpture again, made some changes to widen the head a little bit, scaled it up slightly as well as the hands, and then printed out a second version, which you'll see here. And this version, once I had the clothing on, I could see that it was the right scale, it was the right width, and generally had the right semblance of what I was going after when it came to mimicking the look of the mask. So in the next video, I will be covering the painting of the head and the construction of the costume and dyeing the parts of the costume. And I'm going to get this boy some pants. So the next video will be another like 10-minute one, which will be on painting and construction of the suit. I will like do some wear and tear on the suit to make it appropriate. And that'll be probably ready in less than a week. All right. Anyway, I thank you guys for watching. This is definitely a longer one than I've done in the past. Let me know your thoughts and if you have any questions. And Nomad is very easy and very instinctive to use. It is also very inexpensive. And there's plenty of tutorial information up there. So thanks again for your time, and I hope you enjoyed. Take care.